Good afternoon. I'm Cliff Harrison with Sarasota County Utilities Planning, and I am, as was stated, sharing my time today with John Ryan from Sarasota County as well. John and I have a couple different perspectives on to present to you on preserved lands. My topic is water quantity and how preserved lands play a role in protecting water quantities, but most of what you've seen today and expect to see is mostly dealing with surface water. I'm a groundwater geologist. My primary focus is in water supply for public utilities and for public potable supply. So the reality of it is I could stop right here, let John take over, and just leave it at saying it's not all that complicated. Preserved land doesn't get developed. There's less runoff. Less impervious surface area means more infiltration, natural seasonal cycles of high and low flows to tide. But that wouldn't be all that interesting for my field. So let's see what I can talk to you, give you a little bit more information about how we handle the demands of water supplies for the public. The reality of it is that without a healthy tax base and a prosperous community, no tax money is going to be available to preserve undeveloped lands. Lisa mentioned to me earlier, she did have a point that if there isn't a community, there isn't population, no development, there's no need for preserved lands. But that's not the reality in Florida, hasn't been for a while. Every resident of our state expects clean drinking water to come out of the tap when they wake up in the morning. Most people don't think much about what it takes to get there. But let's start off back to the nice, pleasant picture, back in the flatwoods with our ironweed blooming, because this is where it all starts, a major component of the regional water supply network. The water in Florida that we drink, most of our drinking water comes from wells. Groundwater is a hidden source. It's the least noticed, but the most vital element of water supply systems in most of Florida. When we're talking about quantities of water for public supply, one of the key issues is they're tied to the quantities that are authorized for use are tied to the avoidance of environmental impacts. Because water is a public resource in Florida, both surface water and groundwater. The use of that resource is regulated through water use or consumptive use permits, and the applicants must demonstrate that there's a reasonable beneficial use for that water while not negatively affecting the environment or other legal users. In fact, a term that's come into play in the last 10 years, it was pretty radical when it was brought into play in the water use permitting field, was the preservation of quantities of water for ecological systems, or water reservation for the environment. Tied to that is that one of our primary concerns is not causing drawdown in the superficial aquifer. Drawdown in deeper aquifers, especially in areas where the aquifers are not confined, that drawdown can transmit rapidly upwards and cause significant drawdowns in the superficial systems. That gives us problems with protecting wetlands, lakes, creeks, rivers, and springs. Dry lakes and wetlands are what led to the Tampa Bay water wars and the development of the concept of minimum flows and levels, or the point beyond which harm will occur. Developing these minimum flows and levels is a pretty complicated process. A lot of peer-reviewed scientific studies go into it, as many of you are familiar with, I'm sure. But a lot of factors are involved in evaluating what a true minimum flow and level for an aquatic system is. Practical limitations on the quantity of groundwater that we can pump out of the ground are typically limited to chemical content, dissolved minerals such as iron from shallower zones, sulfate from deeper zones, and critically, in our area of southwest Florida, is saltwater intrusion, chlorides, primarily from lateral intrusion of saline water from the coast. To preserve the land for water supply means you have control over it, you have security, you have the ability to protect your wellheads from contamination, you have the ability to protect your groundwater quantities because you're eliminating competing users in the area from coming in and trying to use those same quantities. Reliability is the key to responsible growth planning. There's a lot of integrated sources that come into supplying water now and in the future. Sarasota County is looking forward past the year 2050 now. We've got long-term planning. It's a constantly moving target because some of our water supplies will be going offline, some will be coming online. Reliability is the key. We operate on a slim margin because the Water Management District's not going to permit anything that we can't demonstrate an actual need for. So how does this all tie together in our Charlotte Harbor watershed, Sarasota, Mayac, and Peace River upstream from here? Back in the 60s, there was the concept of preserved lands for Sarasota County. The planners thought that the best thing to do would be preserving lands closer to the coast where the development was, thought that that was the area that our water supplies would be most stressed. And so most of these green blocks that you see, most of them are west of the Myakka River, west of where I-75 was built. Also, most of these were not preserved in the long term. You do see the large block that became the whole Myakka Center, Myakka River State Park. But most of these other areas are either minimally, Oscar Shearer's in one of these areas, but most of them actually ended up succumbing to development. And through time, the water resources of the area were stressed, focused the reassessment of long-term land preservation goals further to the east. Nowadays, what we see around the Myakka River Park, which dates back to basically to the eve of World War II, 1942, fast forward 40 years, after Myakka was preserved for ecological reasons, the T. Mabry Carleton Memorial Reserve was purchased in '82 as a potable water source and for recreational and open space purposes, a well field. A lot of people look at the big block on the map and see the Carleton and think that whole thing is a well field. It's not. We really have a small footprint, small impact there. Land preservation in Sarasota County now and for the last 20 years has been focused primarily east of the Myakka River because long-term planning policies have constrained most of the growth to the west. It's just a quick overview of the geological layers underlying Sarasota County. We have a thick clay layer called the Venice Clay that comes into play in our area, prevents the downward migration of rainwater and surface water into our producing zones of our aquifers. Our producing zones are mostly pressurized in artesian flow or semi-artesian flow, so there's an upward gradient. We don't have a lot of danger of contaminants migrating down, but our water supplies are recharged from inland, from the east, and discharging to the west, to the coast. Artesian conditions used to predominate where the water table and the recharge area, the central part of the state, was higher than it was near the coast, and so wells would flow at land surface. But as development has increased and water tables and water pressures, water availability has diminished in the central part of the state, those artesian flows have reduced. And in fact, gradients have begun to move inwards, causing saltwater intrusion, both from lateral sources from saltwater from the coast and vertical intrusion as the well fields are stressed and pumping more mineralized water up from deeper zones. It gets a little bit more confusing and more difficult to deal with when we get into the actual conditions that we have in southwest Florida where there's multiple aquifer zones being pumped and recharged at different rates. So saltwater intrusion can actually affect different layers of the aquifer to different degrees. In fact, there's enough information understood now that over-extraction of the groundwater in our outlook, not knowing where we're going with our water supplies, or something nice and clear with a focused and integrated direction moving forward for our protection of our water supplies. And I can take questions now or wait for after John. Yes?
Cliff, I got a couple questions. They're not necessarily related, but what are the average depths of your injection wells?
Our injection wells that are used for disposal of the brine concentrate
Correct.
from our RO wells, as well as excess highly treated wastewater, running on the order of anywhere from 1,800 to 2,500 feet deep.
Thank you. The other question, like I say, it's not related, but what's the average depth of your Venice Clay layer?
Venice Clay running anywhere from 50 to 90 feet on average.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. And the second part, John Ryan.